He sent kings and queens to the guillotine. Then his own scream echoed beneath the blade. This is the story of how Maximilien Robespierre, the face of revolution, became its final victim. The streets of Arras were drenched in rain when he was born, May 6, 1758. A strange stillness settled over the northern French town, as if the sky itself knew a storm had arrived in human form. His name, Maximilien François-Marie Isidore de Robespierre. He was a boy of silence, eyes too serious for his age, always watching. When other children ran through the gardens laughing, Maximilien sat with books, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and the sharp claws of Roman justice. The death of his mother when he was 6 cast a shadow across his soul that never lifted. His father fled the pain, leaving the children orphaned. Something inside Maximilien hardened. By 12, he was chosen to read a Latin address to King Louis XVI, a king who would later lose his head by Robespierre's hand. The moment was chilling in retrospect. A child bowing to a monarch who would one day kneel to the blade at the child's command. He entered law school at the prestigious Lycée Louis le Grand in Paris. But even there he was different. Poor, reserved, intensely driven. While others mocked his solemnity, professors whispered about his genius. He graduated as a lawyer but spoke not with cold legalese. His voice burned with moral fire. He didn't want power. At least not yet. What he wanted was purity, virtue, the republic of the good. He believed that only the incorruptible could lead the people, and so he became that image slowly, obsessively, dangerously. Robespierre had entered the world as a quiet storm. But revolutions don't whisper, they scream. And soon the world would hear his name, in courts, in prisons, in blood. The guillotine had not yet tasted his wrath, but it was sharpening. Paris trembled. The streets were raw with hunger, thick with the stench of injustice. Bread was scarce. Nobles rode in carriages through crowds of starving children. The people had begun to murmur, and murmurs in time grow into screams. Into this chaos stepped Maximilien Robespierre. He wasn't imposing, thin, pale, with powdered hair and small, sharp eyes. But when he spoke, even the wind held its breath. He wasn't like the other deputies of the Estates General in 1789. Where they offered politics, he offered conviction. Where they played games, he preached virtue. In the halls of Versailles, his speeches rang like thunder in a marble tomb. The people are sacred, he declared once, his voice rising above the jeers. And he who betrays them is damned. He earned a nickname whispered in salons and behind fans, the Incorruptible. A man who could not be bought, who feared no king, no cardinal, no executioner. He walked through Paris like a shadow, always alone, always thinking. His lodgings were simple. He lived as he preached, austere, ascetic, cold. He took no mistresses, drank no wine, laughed at no jokes. To some, he was a saint. To others, a fanatic. But the people listened, and that terrified those in power. He rose quickly through the ranks of the revolutionary clubs, the Jacobins, the Cordeliers. Every time he opened his mouth, it was as if the revolution itself was speaking. His words weren't just speeches, they were weapons, precise and deadly. He told them that to build a republic of virtue, the corrupt must fall. That to create liberty, blood would have to spill. They clapped. They cheered. They did not yet understand, he meant all of them. Even his allies. The revolution had teeth now. By 1791, the National Assembly no longer debated like philosophers. They hissed like vipers. France's old world was crumbling, and its new architects had begun sharpening blades. At the heart of the storm, Robespierre. He no longer simply spoke for the people. He began to speak as if he were the people. His eyes darted across the hall, always watching, always judging. Some whispered that he no longer trusted anyone, not Danton, not Desmoulins, not even himself. The air inside the Jacobin club had turned foul, thick with suspicion and sweat. Former allies now sat apart. Letters were intercepted. Murmurs turned to accusations. And still, Robespierre spoke with calm fury. Those who seek to stop the revolution are enemies of virtue. And enemies of virtue must perish. That was all it took. A name spoken in Robespierre's voice became a sentence. And soon that sentence was death. Men disappeared. First quietly, then publicly. The guillotine, once reserved for tyrants, now licked the necks of deputies. Their crime? Treasonous thought. Counter-revolutionary ideals. Or worst of all, moderation. The assembly chamber, once lined with red velvet and golden trim, now echoed with paranoia. Every speech was a test. Every silence a threat. Deputies arrived pale and sleepless, knowing they might not leave alive. And yet Robespierre remained untouchable. a statue carved in fear. He had not raised a sword, but he had pointed the finger. "I am not cruel," he said once. "Only just. But blood is the price of his justice." And now, the floor of the assembly was slick with it. The guillotine didn't just claim enemies. It devoured brothers. Camille Desmoulins had been with Robespierre from the beginning. They'd marched together, bled together, dreamed together, of liberty, of a new France. Camille's pen had set fire to the streets. His words stirred the mob like no speech ever could. But now those same words, full of mercy, full of caution, threatened the revolution's high priest. Camille begged for sanity in a world drunk on blood. He wrote, "Let us not become monsters in hunting monsters." And Robespierre read those words. Alone in the candlelight of his study, robe draped over thin shoulders, eyes sunk with sleeplessness, he trembled, not with sadness, but with resolve. "He pities the traitors," he whispered. "Then he stands with them." The Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre's shadow cabinet, nodded in grim silence. Camille was no longer a friend. He was a liability. April 1794. They came for Camille in the early morning. He was dragged from his apartment, his young son crying behind him. His wife, Lucille, beaten for screaming too loudly. That night, Robespierre sat alone, the distant toll of the execution bell echoing through the Paris fog. A drop of red wine stained his paper as he wrote, "Justice is indivisible." Camille was led to the scaffold. His hair wild, eyes empty. He searched the crowd. For a face. For his face. Robespierre wasn't there. He never watched them die. But the blade still fell. And with it, the last piece of Robespierre's soul. They didn't just die. They whispered. Each soul that passed beneath the guillotine left behind an echo, and those echoes began to haunt Maximilien Robespierre. They seeped through the silence of night. They rustled behind the heavy velvet drapes of the Jacobin Club. They walked beside him on cobblestone streets. First, Danton's voice. Rough, mocking, bold even in death. "You needed my fire. Now burn in your cold." Then Camille's. Broken, sorrowful. "You killed me, Max. But you killed yourself too." Robespierre's eyes grew hollow. He no longer spoke with the fire of purpose. His speeches turned to mysticism, to purity, to a France untouched by doubt. The people, once wild with love, began to murmur. And worse, they began to fear. At night, Robespierre lit candles in every room. He prayed to a god he once mocked, kneeling on creaking floorboards, begging for silence. But the whispers only grew louder. At times he would stop mid-sentence, staring past the crowd. "Do you not hear them?" he once asked. They didn't. But they saw the tremble in his hand. They saw the sweat on his collar. They saw the beginning of his fall. He returned to the committee with trembling fingers and mad eyes. He demanded more purges. More names. No one was safe. Not old allies, not young idealists, not even those who were silent. "Silence," he hissed, "is betrayal." The whispering of the dead had become his only counsel. He stood at the summit of the artificial mountain, clad in Roman robes, eyes sunken and wild. Below him, Paris watched in hushed disbelief. Robespierre had become something else. No longer just the incorruptible. Now, the prophet. "The Supreme Being watches," he thundered, "and I am his voice." The festival of the Supreme Being was meant to be a celebration of virtue, of purity, of the new republic under divine moral order. But what the people saw was a man who looked like a god king, not a servant. Blue smoke curled behind him. Trumpets wailed like angels falling from heaven. The papier-mâché mountain stood unnaturally tall, like a sacrificial altar. Children dressed as innocents. Men paraded as reason. But there was no joy, only fear. "What has he become?" muttered the old Jacobins. "A tyrant dressed in holiness," whispered the sans-culottes. As Robespierre descended from his mount, flowers rained down, but no one smiled. Even the sky rebelled. Storm clouds rolled in, choking the sun, casting long shadows that clawed across the banners of liberty. That night, the committee met in secret. Carnot, Billaud, Collot, and Fouché. One by one they spoke. "He thinks he is divine. He fears shadows and speaks to ghosts. He will kill us all to keep his vision pure." And they made a vow. Before the next sunrise, Robespierre must fall. But Robespierre already sensed it. He felt it in the silence, in the shifting eyes of guards, in the way even the wind seemed to whisper, "You're next." He gripped his coat tighter and walked faster through the alleys, past the statues of reason he once raised with fire in his heart. "You were meant to be a savior," the dead whispered again. Instead, you crowned yourself a god. And the living? They began to sharpen their own knives. The ink was still wet when he dropped the pen. Another list. Another set of names. Another night of no sleep. Robespierre sat alone in his chamber, candle flickering violently in the stale air. The parchment before him trembled, not from the drafty window but from the weight of it. These names? They were different. Danton, Camille, Demoulin. They had once laughed with him, fought beside him, built the revolution together. Now they haunted it. Traitors were familiar faces, he told himself. But his hand shook. The room had become a tomb. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch him, their painted eyes judging silently. The air was thick not just with smoke, but with paranoia. Downstairs, the guards sharpened blades, unaware they too might be on the next list. Everyone was watching everyone. No one slept. Not anymore. That evening, he walked to the convention, clutching the folded paper in his vest. The city was unnaturally quiet. No jeers, no applause, only the soft echo of his boots on wet cobblestones. Inside the hall, torches hissed. Deputies turned their heads. Whispers flitted like ghosts through the chamber. Another list. Who this time? He stepped forward, heart pounding beneath his coat. But then, silence. He stopped. Where was the courage? Where was the conviction that once roared like cannon fire from his throat? He tried to speak, tried to unroll the parchment, but his fingers froze. Eyes locked on him, cold, suspicious, unforgiving, and he knew. He was no longer feared. He was no longer followed. He was next. Without a word, he turned and left the chamber. The paper fell to the floor, unopened, unread, and already forgotten. It began with a knock. Not a thunderous pound, not a battering ram, but a tap. Almost polite, almost human. Robespierre didn't answer. His chamber reeked of sweat and ink. The candle had long since drowned in its own wax. He sat upright in bed, wide-eyed, breathing shallowly. He hadn't undressed, hadn't moved, not since the list. Tap, tap, tap. "It's Saint," came the whisper from the door. His closest ally. The one man left he could trust. Or could he? He hesitated before rising, each creak of the wooden floor beneath his feet sounding like the snap of a neck. He opened the door slowly. Saint just stood there, cloak soaked from the rain, eyes shining, but not with loyalty, not with friendship, with resolution. "You must come." "No. The convention. They're voting." Robespierre's throat went dry. Voting on what? Saint just didn't answer. Down the stairwell, shadows moved. He caught glimpses, other Jacobins. Soldiers. Not followers this time. Watchers. He was being escorted, not summoned. Dragged, not welcomed. The night outside was thick with mist. Each street lamp flickered as if struggling to stay alive. Whispers followed them like footsteps. He's lost control. It's over. The tyrant is finished. Inside the convention hall, no one rose when he entered. No applause. No standing ovation. Only silence. Cold, absolute silence. The president did not greet him. Papers shuffled. Eyes avoided his. Even the quill pen seemed to scratch with judgment. Then he saw it. A new list. Not one written by him, but of him. Maximilien Robespierre, guilty of crimes against the revolution. And beneath his name, Saint, Guillotine and Lebas, his own allies, his final circle. "This isn't justice," Robespierre muttered, but the words came out soft, barely a breath. He stepped forward, but a soldier barred his way. Another cocked a musket, and that's when he realized there were no more speeches to save him. No more words, no more lists, only silence, only night. He tried to speak. The words caught in his throat like bone splinters. His voice, once the thunder of the revolution, now cracked and feeble, silenced by betrayal, drowned by fear. They had bound him, not with ropes, but with paperwork, with decrees, ink, and the shifting tides of public sentiment. "You will remain here under guard," the officer said, "until the morning." Robespierre's lip trembled. He turned to Saint-Just, but the man had vanished behind a line of bayonets. He was alone. In the cell of the Hôtel de Ville, the former titan of the revolution sat slumped in a wooden chair, fingers twitching over the edge. The windows were high and narrow, no moonlight, only the stifling smell of mildew and dust. Guillotine had been carried in earlier, pale, shaking, unable to stand. Lebas was silent, eyes glassy. Henri Henriot, blood on his uniform, had been dragged in unconscious. This wasn't an arrest. It was a slaughter in slow motion. Then gunshots. 1, 2, 3. The guard screamed. A door slammed. "They're coming for us." Panic exploded. Robespierre stood, heart pounding. Someone handed him a pistol. His hand shook violently as he aimed it at himself. A flash, a crack, then nothing. He staggered, mouth agape. But he hadn't died. The bullet had shattered his jaw, not his spine, not his brain, just shattered bone and spilled blood. He dropped to the floor with a scream that no longer had shape. Outside, the convention's troops stormed in. The Incorruptible had failed even at dying. Dragged by the collar of his bloodied waistcoat, Maximilien Robespierre, face torn open, was thrown into the street like common filth. His eyes rolled, delirious, as Paris turned upside down. Citizens jeered. A woman spit on him. A child threw a stone. "You made us kneel," someone shouted. "Now look at you." In the cart to the conciergerie, the jail where kings had once waited to die, Robespierre sat beside the broken remains of his inner circle. None spoke. Not because of silence, but because there was nothing left to say. The blade waited, but it knew. It had kissed kings, tasted queens. Now it yearned for the man who once fed it daily with names written in trembling ink. Maximilien Robespierre, the Incorruptible. The judge turned judged. He lay on the cart like a broken doll, his jaw swaddled in a filthy cloth, soaked through with blood. He couldn't speak, not to plead, not to pray, not to scream, but his eyes, they told stories. Stories of crowded chambers, candle smoke, and the roar of revolution. Of lovers hanged for their politics, friends turned enemies, and the abyss that opens when a man believes only he holds the truth. Is that Robespierre? Yes. Look what's left of him. The crowd had swelled like a wave. Paris had come to see the end. Mothers, soldiers, beggars, even those who once called him savior now watched with cold eyes. Not one tear. At the base of the scaffold, the executioner hesitated. The cloth came off. The bandages were ripped away. A scream. Not his. It came from the audience. At the grotesque face of a man undone. Jaw dangling. Eyes bulging. Skin pale with the color of death already sitting in. But no delay. They shoved his head forward. He looked up. At the sky. At the blade. The guillotine whispered, "I remember you." Then, steel met flesh. The fall was quick. The thud final. The crowd gasped, then cheered. The architect of the terror was gone. Gone in a blink. In a splash. In silence. They say the blade caught the sun as it fell. They say his eyes blinked once more in the basket. They say the revolution devours its own. And Paris moved on. The cafes reopened. Children laughed. And the guillotine was clean for the next name. History doesn't whisper. It echoes. Through blood-soaked cobblestones. Through the silence that follows the scream. Through names etched in fear, like Maximilien Robespierre. He preached virtue, but delivered terror. A man who believed in justice, yet built his throne on executions. And in the end, the blade he wielded came for him. Another head in a basket. Another name swallowed by the revolution. But make no mistake, the guillotine still stands. In our stories, in our fears, in the cold lessons of history. The revolution is over, but its shadow never left.